Thank you very much for joining us. I'm WTOP's Capitol Hill correspondent, Mitchell Miller. We're joined by the Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg, as well as Virginia Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger. Thank you very much for joining us to talk about some key transportation issues.
Thanks for having us.
Mr. Secretary, I wanted to start with you. Can you tell us about this new nearly $3 billion program? What's behind it? What's the idea moving forward on it?
Yes, thank you. So this week we're announcing $2.9 billion going out for applications across three major programs that are going to help us improve infrastructure across the country. One of the programs is called MEGA. That's for mega projects so big or complicated that they were difficult to fund with existing programs. The second one is a rural program, rural surface transportation. We got $300 million going to communities, often small communities that have sometimes been left out in the past, but have just as urgent needs in terms of improving their roads or bridges or rail links or other transportation assets as anywhere else in the country. And then the third program called Infra, which was an existing program, but has grown substantially. Matter of fact, about a 50% bump, meaning that we have $1.64 billion available this year, thanks to the bipartisan infrastructure legislation that Representative Spanberger has supported. So with these dollars, we are going to be able to make, I believe, a very big difference in state of good repair, in safety. We can use it to improve supply chains, which are going to continue to be an issue, I think, in our country as we work to upgrade our infrastructure. And we're going to create a lot of jobs along the way.
Now, part of the idea behind this, I understand, is to move things quicker. Obviously, with infrastructure, as we all know, projects can take years, but is that part of the idea?
That's right. We're streamlining and smoothing the process, beginning at the very start with the application itself. So for a city or a county to try to get a federal grant for transportation, that can be a daunting and complicated process. One of the things we've done here is rolled up three programs into one with a single application and a single process. You could think of it in a similar way to the common application that colleges have now. So you don't have to fill in your zip code 7 different times on 7 different forms in order to get something done. The same idea, the same principle applies in federal paperwork too. And one thing the Congresswoman frequently talks to me about is making these processes easier for local governments and agencies to work with, so we can get those dollars flowing and into the ground, get dirt moving, and get those needed transportation improvements.
And Congresswoman, what are some of the things that you would like to see early on as you look at this type of program? Obviously, it's up to the state and to localities, but some of the areas where you think that this could help Virginia.
Well, I want to just echo one thing of what the Secretary Buttigieg mentioned, which is streamlining the programs. I represent a mix of very rural, very suburban, very urban communities, and being able to make sense of all of the different programs that exist is something that creates major challenges for the busy communities that are applying for lots of grants, and for the smaller communities that are really struggling to understand what they might be eligible for. So streamlining it is from the get-go a way for the Department of Transportation to demonstrate to communities we're trying to make these funds available, we're trying to make these programs available. And to answer your question, Mitchell, I think so many of the folks who may be listening to this interview are likely going to be sitting in traffic somewhere along 95 at some point in time. And so road improvements for Virginia to be able to apply for some of these multimodal projects. Certainly there's so many bridges throughout the Commonwealth, particularly as you are heading south along 95, where there's projects that have long been in the works, that there's so much that is available to be done that would help the local economy, certainly help contend with chokeholds that drivers feel and experience. And the fact that the Department of Transportation is leveraging these dollars that I was so proud to vote for to make these tremendous investments in our community, and to make the process of applying for these investments so much easier. This is really exciting news, I think, for anyone in Virginia.
Now, we should note that this is, even though it's billions of dollars, it is a small part of the overall infrastructure bill that was passed by Congress. As we start to move in connection with that, I know, Mr. Secretary, that you have been out and about across the country, as well as here in the Washington area, just looking at all of these places where there are real major problems. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and your hopes with that overall project, all of these projects moving forward.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the reasons why it's so important to have a generational investment. And you're right, this $2.9 billion we're announcing this week is just part of the work that we've been doing in the framework of this bill. We've already been able to grow our port infrastructure development program because we know that our ports need a lot of improvement, especially to keep up with demand on supply chains. We've already put out our program to fix 15,000 bridges around the country, and we're funding that. And, in addition to these dollars that we're talking about today that are part of these competitive programs, a lot of dollars are going out by formula, $7.7 billion headed to Virginia alone for roads and bridges alone. Over the next 5 years, all thanks to this legislation. So this is really about addressing all of our needs, and it's everywhere. It's roads and highways and bridges. It is ports and airports. It is trains and transit. All of them needed a major upgrade for pretty much as long as I've been alive. And president after president, Congress after Congress have talked about doing something. Infrastructure weeks, so-called, have come and gone. Now it's actually happening. And this is the outset of an infrastructure decade, which is what it's going to take, especially to compete with many of our major global economic competitors, notably China, which has been making tons of investments in their infrastructure. Now we're doing the same right here at home.
And in some respects, with all of this money potentially flowing, Congresswoman, this is relatively daunting, I think, for state officials, even though it's great to have the money to figure out and prioritize where all these projects are going to take place. I wonder if you could give us a little bit of an insight into how that will work kind of moving forward on the very ground level as state and local officials try to say, this is a project we need to work on, or this is the one that we need to prioritize over another one.
Well, so certainly within my district and within my district office, we have a team of folks who are focused on our liaison with our local governments, Board of Supervisor member, county administrator, town mayors, city mayors, where our focus is making sense of a lot of the challenges that people might have in understanding what grants are available to them, what funding is available to them. And that's a service that our congressional office provides. And I think that Secretary Buttigieg might have had a glimpse into that when he visited our district, because one of the counties in the 7th district hosted a roundtable, or we hosted a roundtable at the county building with business owners and trucking professionals from across our district, where we were able to ensure that Secretary Buttigieg could hear about the challenges on the ground in Virginia, experienced by small business owners that might rely on those very ports that the Secretary mentioned, importing the goods that they're selling. Some of the individuals from the trucking industry talking about some not only supply chain issues, but labor force issues. And so in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we also, among the investments in roads and bridges and ports and transit, we also make investments in workforce development related to the trucking industry, where certainly we continue to have a real need for a talented workforce to move goods from those ports across the country. And so, as we're working with our localities and certainly the Commonwealth of Virginia, my office and I will be working to ensure that our communities are applying for all of the funds that are available and understand what is available to Virginia in the allocated funding, but particularly in this fantastic announcement, the grant dollars that we can be applying for locally.
And Mr. Secretary, if I could touch on more about the supply chain issue. Obviously, it's a long-term complicated issue, but it's become even more complicated with trade issues related to what's happening with Russia and the international situation with Ukraine. I wonder if you could give us a little insight into how the administration is trying to work through that.
Yeah, it certainly presents new challenges. Russia is a major oil-producing country. Ukraine is a major wheat exporting country. And so when you have these kinds of shocks to the system, certainly the consequences of a war, that is something you're going to feel all around the world. Look, one thing we know about supply chain shocks is they tend to come as a surprise. We don't know what the next curveball will be: a pandemic, an extreme weather event, a war. What we know is we've got to build up our supply chain systems and infrastructure in the US to be more resilient, no matter what those curveballs are. And this is some of what we heard about in that roundtable that the Congresswoman convened that, I still have a lot of memories from, because it was so vivid to hear from the businesses that are on the ground about what they're facing. Look, there's short, medium, and long-term things we can do about this. In the short run, we're extending the hours that our ports operate. We're working with business and labor to try to smooth out some of the issues that are out there. We're even seeing some really creative ideas like temporary pop-up container yards just to keep those containers flowing. We're also, for the medium term, doing new initiatives around data sharing. Turns out a lot of information doesn't flow the way you think it might between ports, terminal operators, shippers, train, warehouse, and truck operators. We can do something about that, not by mandating it, but just by bringing the parties together. And then for the long run, of course, we have to make sure that the public infrastructure that these supply chains run on is in good shape. And that brings me right back to where we started, which is this major round of investments that we're making, especially the infra program, which can really help with freight and goods movement across the country. All of those things add up to a system that is going to be stronger, no matter what the next ugly surprise is in world affairs that could affect our ability to get what we need on time and affordably.
And I wonder, Congresswoman, following up on that, related to what some of these truckers and the people that are your constituents, what are you hearing from them and the ways that they're trying to respond and be creative to deal with some of these issues?
Well, the challenges that we're hearing about in Virginia stretch from basic needs and frankly some excitement about the investments that the United States is now choosing with this infrastructure bill to make in our own infrastructure, to make in our roads and our bridges and our highway, because any minute that a truck is delayed in traffic is dollars out the door. Any minute that they're idling in traffic is dollars out the door. And so recognizing that they can cut down on wear and tear on their vehicles when we improve the quality of our roadways is a benefit to them and helps their business overall. I continue to hear about workforce issues, like how do we ensure the training and the excitement about what is a strong career in the trucking industry, a stable form of employment for so many Americans the country over, a good paying job, a family sustaining job. And so people are excited when I talk about the investments that exist in this bill related to workforce. And then in terms of supply chain disruptions, I still continue to hear from many small businesses or medium-sized businesses that are reliant on goods that they're bringing in from overseas, and some of the supply chain issues that have occurred with backups at the ports and issues related to containers. And then locally and representing many agricultural producers, particularly in the meat and poultry industry, some of the supply chain issues that face challenges moving livestock across the country. And so I've done a lot of work focus on some of the regulations around movement of livestock, and certainly, again, if you can move your cattle on a smoother road and not get stuck at the bridges or the on or off ramps of certain highways, that's an overall benefit to the industry.
Well, speaking about transportation issues, I would be remiss if I didn't ask about gas prices. I know it's a difficult issue for everybody involved. In Congress, Congresswoman, you know that many lawmakers are floating a lot of different pieces of legislation, everything from rebates to tax reductions or tax hikes on oil companies that could somehow be rebated. Mr. Secretary, I wonder if you could explain some of the things that you think the administration is trying to do to address this issue and reduce the pain at the pump.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll point to a few things going on. First of all, the release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and the president has always been somebody who believed in partnerships and alliances. So you'll notice that we didn't just go off and do it alone. He led to make sure that a number of countries were doing it alongside us, so that we had that many more barrels of oil going out there to help stabilize oil prices. Look, there's obviously not some big lever in the Oval Office that controls these things, or things would be pretty different. But there are actions you can take, like that release from the SPR, that make a difference and bring some relief at the pump. Also, a lot of international engagement. and a lot of attention to what's happening in the overall dynamics here. I can't help but notice that when oil goes up, gas prices go up right with it immediately. Not so much the other way around, and I think we need to look at that and look at why that might be. So a lot of things. I know Congress has a lot of interest in this too. I think this is one of those times when all options need to be on the table, and we'll continue assessing what is called for to bring that relief. Meanwhile, of course, a lot of other things we can be doing at the same time that will certainly bring direct relief to American families and household budgets, lowering the cost of insulin, lowering the cost of housing and childcare, things we can act on right now, even as gas prices go through these really challenging ups and downs.
And related to that, if I could, Senator Joe Manchin, as you probably have heard, is floating some ideas of perhaps having a more slimmed down version of the Build Back Better. I wonder if there's any kind of sense of any type of movement there. I know it's an election year, so it's going to be tough, but I wonder if either of you could give me a little bit of insight on that issue.
So I'll begin, Mr. Secretary, if you don't mind, to begin just talking about what I've been advocating for, including directly with the president when he came to visit Virginia's 7th District. The president came to talk about prescription drug prices, and more importantly, to hear from my constituents about the impact of prescription drug prices on their lives. And what Secretary Buttigieg said is exactly right. When we're looking at supply chain issues and the cost of gas and overall issues related to inflation that create a general level of unease in people's lives, the impact of not being able to afford one's prescription drugs is all the more heart-wrenching. And so the president did come to our district and heard directly from people I represent the same stories they've told me, talking about the choices they're making, about how they structure their purchase of insulin so that they can actually afford it to keep their loved ones alive, or choosing between putting food on the table and buying the prescription drugs that they need to keep themselves healthy. And so as we look at what elements of the Build Back Better framework that we had passed through the House could move forward, an important element there is what we passed on prescription drugs. We passed legislation out of the House that would cap insulin copays. It would cap Medicare copays, and it would allow many of the medications under Medicare Part D to be able to negotiate the cost of prescription drugs. Now, we are a capitalist country, but yet currently under current law, Medicare is prohibited from being able to negotiate the cost of the prescription drugs of those who utilize its programs. And so that's an extraordinary reality and one that Congress must fix. So I'm excited about the fact that there is still possibility of moving forward on these pillar issues, prescription drug pricing. And frankly, I know there's a lot of interest in moving forward with issues related to climate and frankly, investing in our energy independence, because I'm a former CIA officer. Our energy independence, as I'm sure the Secretary would tell you, is a national security priority and one that we must pursue. Investments in renewable energy is so important, particularly as we look at what we're seeing on the global landscape when we are constantly contending with certain nations, in this case it's Russia, that are major energy producers. If we can bring that production home, and as the Secretary said, in all of the above approach, so it is domestic production of oil and gas, it's also investing in the next generation of renewable energies that we can use in tandem with the existing energy sources that we have here domestically. And I think there's a path forward, and I'm working on it.
All right. And just lastly, related to that, as both of you know, Republicans have been hammering the administration and Democrats on the issue of oil exploration, on energy, saying that the United States needs to be more independent. Mr. Secretary, just as a final question, what would be your response as to what the White House and the administration is doing in connection with these issues?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are, I believe, thousands of permits right now that are out there that could be used, and they're not. The companies aren't even taking advantage of them. So I know this subject becomes a political football. But if you look at the actual energy strategy of this administration, it is, as the Congresswoman said, about U.S. energy independence. It's about moving to the future. It's all the above with a lot of different sources of energy, and realistically recognizing that we are where we are today. And we're going to have a 21st century that's going to look a little different from the 20th century. And that's important for all kinds of considerations, including national security.
All right, we will leave it there. Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary and Congresswoman. Appreciate you joining us here on WTOP.
Thank you.
Same here. Thank you. Great being with you.
All right, thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Same here.
Thank you.
Enjoyed it. Thank
All right,
you.
take care. Have a good weekend.